portal on yesterday. And so it's actually due a month from yesterday. So there's a lot of time to work on this and getting some assistance. But I want everyone also to meet the co-facilitator for this evening as well. Dr. Pam, did you have anything that you wanted to say before we kind of move forward?
Just want to say hello to everyone and glad to be here. And that's it. I'll share in a few.
Great. Well, one of the things that we do want to, I know you've given us your organization, but we also want to kind of be able to get a feel of, who we're talking to, because that it's going to help to kind of craft the direction in reference to the content. Because if we have a bunch of neophytes, right, or people who haven't had experience in kind of grant writing or submitting proposals for funding, or we have experts, or we have a mixture of all, it can be helpful. So if you have received a grant from any funder, or if you've had received a grant from BCYF, if you can put that in the chat, that would be helpful for us. And if you have not, or you feel like I kind of know a little bit, have experience, and I don't know a little bit of the experience, kind of let us know your experience with proposal writing, as well as experience in reference to receiving grant funding. That would be really helpful for us to monitor. Going to take a look at that. Okay, great. Great, we definitely have some experience here. Very good. This is very helpful. Great. Thank you so very much. And then I want us to kind of look at the priorities that BCYF has in reference to their priorities, and think about your grant, your program idea that you're wanting social investment in to bring that to fruition for you. So let us know in the chat if you're going to be focused on culturally sustaining priority, the future forward one, doing well by doing, that holistic approach, the youth voice, or networked. Which of those priorities do you think you are leaning more towards regarding your grant proposal? That would be helpful as well. 11 years with grant writing, great.
It looks like Dr. Pam did share those 5 priorities in the chat if you need to reference back to what those 5 are.
Okay, cultural sustainability, doing well, the voice. And thank you for putting one or the other, because some people have not decided yet. This is part of that decision making, but that is helpful because we'll lean a little bit more on the one. And if, as we're talking, you actually switch or change, let us know in the chat, because we'll make more emphasis. We have a limited time, but we want to make this as fruitful as possible. We're going to go over this quickly in reference to just the page. And one of the things I want you to realize is really take advantage of this particular workbook. It is a intentional Microsoft Word, which means that it's very helpful for you to kind of work with it, type out your answers, spell check your answers. So before you actually put it and apply within the JOT form by clicking and getting access to that particular portal. So the first thing we wanted to really kind of emphasize, I think is important, is understanding just that this is a very unique process, that you have a funder who is so committed into equity and making sure that the playing field is fair, that is exposing individuals and providing technical assistance and being very committed to the community, and particularly youth serving communities, that investment is for grassroots. It's that focus. It's for those soldiers on the ground in the community with experience with the community. And then also making sure that the funding really does align with that sponsoring nonprofit or the sponsor for the idea. And then also just the belief that technical assistance isn't a given. It's something that really has to be tailored to the needs, and building capacity and technical assistance is ongoing. I do want you to know that Hannah is going to put the actual link as well in the chat regarding the portal. But the first thing that you want to do is with any grant proposal is really assess, am I eligible? Do I fit the basic eligibility criteria for the grant, right? Are you a 501c3? You may or you may not, but you may have a sponsoring a 501c3 that is willing, which is a nonprofit charitable organization in Maryland that's willing to support you on this endeavor. The people that you serve, the population, the youth that you serve, is it in Baltimore City, right? Is it a Baltimore state? Is it city? Is it youth centered? And looking at the age parameter for that as well. And then in reference to your organization, regarding just the human capital, the people that are employed there, 51% of them have to be residents of Baltimore City. And has your organization been in existence for at least 1 year? 1 year is not 11 months, but looking at what those criteria may be and your experience, it doesn't mean that you have to have 50 years, but it's saying at least 1 year of experience in working and running, right, managing, overseeing a youth program. And then there are just some questions that are helpful. Just because you answer no does not mean that you disqualify, but just going over the steps and clearly kind of understanding what those components may be. And also, as we're going through this, looking at those lists of priorities, because you can only note one for the
Dr.
grant.
Sharon, I just want to chime in on one thing. If you do say no to any of those eligibility criteria, you are disqualified from the Grassroots Fund grant.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was thinking of that first one, like, am I 501c3? And the answer is no. I was going to let them know that most people like, I don't qualify, but the reality is if you have a 501c3 in good standing with the state of Maryland, who will sponsor you, that is not disqualifying you.
Yeah, exactly.
But in reference to putting down the information, if we ask for the address, make sure you give the zip code, give the full name, go over to make sure. You'd be surprised sometimes when we're typing how we can make errors, right? But making sure the phone number, those sorts of things are correct. And having that information in advance, also pacing yourself, right? I would have my final one. I would have some of my ones that I'm writing my notes down and I'm making sure. And if I don't know how to do something, to ask. That's what the technical assistance is here for. Looking at that federal ID number, I think is extremely important. Who to contact, right? Particularly if we're talking about the organization versus the actual person who is going to be responsible for overseeing the proposed program. All of that information needs to be put in. It needs to be correctly spelled. It needs to have the right address, the right number. Again, not overthinking, because that makes you very stressful, but making sure that you have a clear mind, you're taking your time, and sometimes you may have to take a break, but exhale, release. Why not you? And why not this time regarding this great idea that you have? We just want to make sure that you're looking at this. When we talk about the racial demographics, it says select all that apply. The organizational leadership, that's the board that oversees the nonprofit, the staff, those key members, that's important. And then also some attachments. For example, the IRS will issue, it can't be a pending 501c3. It has to be one that you've actually received that determination letter. So a copy of that. Looking at your organizational budget, a 990. You may say, well, what is a 990? There are some examples of that in the appendix, but also we'll be going over those things next week with some of our technical assistants. So some of these things, please do not allow anything we say to kind of stop you unless you clearly are not eligible for this. Still kind of go through the process, because there are things that we can work one-on-one with you or within a group, even computer-wise. We don't want anything to block you if you're eligible and you're willing to move forward with us in this process and applying for this particular funding. A lot of people will say, well, oh my goodness, we don't have a certificate of good standing in the state of Maryland. We don't even know how to get it. Well, there's information. You'll go to Maryland Assessment and Taxation. Those instructions are there. It's a fee that you have to pay in order to be in good standing, and certain things that information that you need to give Those turnaround times are pretty quick, depending on one that you have based on the category that you're in Maryland. But all of those things and examples, looking at the budget for the organization, knowing that you don't want it to be over $750,000. When you are at a point where there has to be the financial review, like an audit, it's because you have a budget over 300 organizationally for that organization. That's when, in addition to the other things regarding the budgets that are going to be requested, that 990, which we'll talk about, and there's an example of one, and then the certificate, that's the minimal. But if your organizational budget exceeds 300, that's when there needs to be some type of financial review. It could be an audit, those sorts of things, to be able to ensure that this is not just investment worthy, but the organization has some fiscally sound infrastructure. Looking at your participants and looking at their ranges of ages, I think is extremely important. The number that you are serving in your program. Some of these things you can kind of highlight, put some comments on, or questions that you may have. One of the things that I think is really important is sometimes we use verbs and words that people are familiar in our field, but in reference to layman terms, it can be even looking at acronyms. So for example, when we're looking at this population in reference to who your program is going to target and recruit and serve, and you will list all that apply, you may be, I have no idea what a BBIA youth is. Black, Brown, Indigenous, Asian youth, right? And youth is a plural word. Looking at individuals that have neurological diversities and accessibility issues. Looking at those who are experiencing homelessness. And even when we think of the criminal justice system, it says involved as in past tense, right? Those who may have been in out-of-home placement through Child Department of Social Services, foster care, or protective services. Those in reference to sexual minorities, I don't like using the term minorities, but diverse sexual identities, as well as being very sensitive in reference to how people self-identify themselves. So all of that information that, if it applies to you, you definitely want to highlight and start really thinking about telling them, right, more about the youth that you serve, right? Are they parents? Their specific age group, in reference to, are there immigrants or refugees? Those are not synonymous terms, but just kind of understanding. And perhaps in that particular section, there may not be a description of the population that you seek to recruit and to serve. And so you have an opportunity to describe that and using words that you are fully comfortable with. Also looking at the programming regarding the year that you want to begin of that programming and how many sites that you have, particularly looking at your experience and what you plan to do. The frequency of the program, is this a one and done kind of event? Is this something that's done all year round, or are there just certain times of the year or the school year? Maybe this is when your program is active, or in the summer months. But being able to give the individuals who are going to be reviewing your work an idea of what it is. And I, again, don't want you overthinking. I want you feeling very comfortable, right, in doing this. And this is all we're doing is reviewing it. Doesn't mean you have to have the answers right. It may not be all of the things, but it gives you an idea that this is user-friendly in the process. And if there is anything that you don't understand, please reach out to us, because we'll try to make sure we can reframe it in a way that you can understand. I'm a believer in universal learning. Some people are visual, some people can read it and get it. Some people have to have different verbiage and different words and different times to be able to do it. Also, I do know that BCYF will also, as you're going through your application, have embedded links that you can click on, and it'll be a video kind of sharing and giving and explaining to you even more. So there's so many ways that you can kind of get it, because it's one thing to go through a training and we're talking fast and we're kind of moving kind of quickly. It's another thing when it's just you and maybe your pet cat and you're working on this and you're like, I forgot what she said, I forgot what he said. But you can kind of look at the video. You can look at some of the prompts that will be there to be able to serve you. Also in reference to the times your programs will be delivered. to the specific youth centered program that you're doing. Is it going to be out of school time, or is it going to be during that time? Also, in reference to in-person, we know with COVID, a lot of things were virtual. Well, hybrid, it's not a car, right? The term is really used to do like a mixture, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it may be a 50-50. You may be able to explain that. Basically, that there are going to be times that we have virtual contact with our population base that we're working on, the youth that we're serving, and there sometimes will be virtual or be in person, right? How many hours will you deliver this a year? And you want to estimate that, but be as close to that estimation as possible. So these are some questions. They also, I want to kind of let you know that when we talk about mission and vision and outcomes, there are courses that have already, sessions that have already taken place, and you can find those on the website. But there are also ones that are coming up that talk about like collaboration, that talk about the 990, that talk about program evaluation and outcomes. But these are some examples, right? Sometimes just having an example, this experiential learning is extremely important. I think is important as process learning. One of the things that as we go to this next section and we're looking at tell us the history, we do not have a whole lot of time. We do not have a whole lot of words. So you want to be concise, and you do not want to exceed 300 words, right? That's your limit. You don't want to go 302. We really want to follow the instructions, because remember, the person who's going to be reviewing this is going to see, did you answer the question? Did you answer the question that was asked of you? Did you stay within the word limit? And if you go to the computer sessions that'll be on some of the weekends, on Saturdays, one will be on Monroe Street, another time it'll be at the library. They'll show you whether you have a Mac or you're using a word processor, where you can use those tools, where you can find how many words that you're using, doing spell check, Grammarly check as well. This is the place that I really do want to kind of emphasize, and this is you have to choose a priority based on what we had talked about. But let's kind of look at kind of operationalizing these terms. Culturally sustaining. What does that mean? That part of awareness, of understanding who they are. And culture is a broad term. So you want to be real clear when you're giving that information. And again, there is a short response, which is a 300-word limit, right? Learning how to be concise. When you initially do your draft, you want to pull out your heart. But when you go back and editing, you're going to be looking at using words, taking out words, or perhaps adding words to bring more clarity to that component. Future forward, it's not let's this looking in a very tunnel vision, but looking at the impact that based on your program design and its mission and its purpose and the objectives and the strategy, the forward connection with relationships, very forward thinking and looking at impact regarding that. Doing well by doing. This is experiential. This is actually having, when we talk about social and emotional needs, experiential experiencing. It's not just a program. It's something that we want the action, the impact to be embedded in that particular process. And when we talk about voice, we're not just talking about the volume of the voice, but people feeling a sense of belonging. What is their input? It's not that we decide what we want to do. We're getting input constantly from the youth, and we're listening. We're actively listening. And then when we talk about collaboration and networking, for some people, they may be turned off by their term, but the reality is nobody works as an island, and we really do need to kind of work together. These all are examples, and look at the space that you have, even though we're talking about the JOT form, but this is this Word document that you can kind of type in, write in whatever you want to put, and putting your notes down and kind of begin to formalize that and have that resource with you as you're actually working on the JOT form. And that's an online portal that allows you to take one of this. It doesn't show you all of these questions like we're looking at now, but it's one at a time, right? Who is participating? Again, a short answer. What will they do? What are some of the activities? You can't write a dissertation, right? There's so much more that you may want to do, but you want to highlight those important parts of it. Now we're getting to some of those questions where we're talking about 500 word limit. So we're adding 200 words, which is how will you know this has happened, right? And you want to be thoughtful with that. I mean, I really encourage any individuals to kind of looking at the difference between a program objective and a program outcome. And we'll be having sessions, whether you can attend or not, will be recorded, and the PowerPoints will definitely be placed on the website. I do want you to know I'm talking a little bit fast, only because we do want to have at least 30 minutes of Q&A as we move forward. Also looking at the regional areas within Baltimore City, it may be that all of these apply, and maybe just some of them apply, but make sure you're looking at those regional kind of qualifications. The next is the last part, and I want to take a little, maybe about 2 more little extra minutes to talk about this rubric. Think of a rubric as like a assessment, as a report card that the individuals who will be reviewing your proposal will be looking at. And looking at this Likert scale from 0 to 3, right? If somebody did not address the priority area, that's going to be key. We know that they're 5, and maybe you added 2. And they didn't ask for 2, they asked for 1. And so if it's well stated and it's very clear, it says the outcomes were addressed in reference to priorities, it was clear, and there was a significance regarding the work that they are proposing, right? Number 2 is rational. They rationalized, and it was maybe too general and not as specific. It was vague. 1 is that it was weak. We want to kind of focus on this area, right? Maybe when you do your draft, you may be from 1 to 2, but when you do your final input, you want the best that comes, and best cannot come with anxiousness, right? We want that energy used in a positive way for you to take the time. So that's the justification. Why do you want to do this, and what are you going to be doing? How are you going to measure success? How do you even define success? You know, so looking at that section, you know, did you, in those words, word count of 300 words or less, was it a clear picture of how it's going to be measured? Do not use, I always sometimes thought if we use big words, that means I'm really smart, and that isn't even the case. Use words that you understand. When you're passionate about something, being yourself is the best person that you can be. Yes, we can wordsmith. Yes, we can get word and verb agreement and the statements clearer, but we want you, and we want it not just good, but we want it clear, right? And then you have feasibility, right? It may be a lot of great wishes that you have about culturally sustaining issues that are future forward for our youth. But is it reasonable? Is it feasible? It can be done within that 3-year time framing of this funding, which is going to be through 2026. And then also, we're looking at the relationship that your idea of your program has with your organization, your nonprofit's mission, vision, and values. And this also includes even the person that you're partnering with if you don't have your own 501c3. These are some examples of the that certificate of good standing. This is one that has been redacted, but this is basically all that you would receive. And you can receive it if you have the funding and you file the necessary paperwork with the state within less than 24 hours. Sometimes they give it to you within 10 minutes. So you definitely want to go to Maryland's tax assessment for that certification. This is an example of a larger organization that's filling out this form. This is an IRS form, which we'll talk about also next week. And this is basically if that nonprofit owns automobiles, boats, planes. These are examples. This is a 990 also from a larger organization because they have a larger budget and it's much more detailed. But if your organization is mid-sized, they would do a 990 EZ. If it's an organization that has a budget less than $50,000, they will be doing a 990 N, and it's just a postcard. So there are examples of these kind of justification documentation that we'll be sharing in some of our sessions, but it's actually already in the toolkit for you to visually be able to see. Please do not allow all of this to like blow you and make you scared, like, you know, based on that. And then in reference to some of the like the 990 and the 990 EZ examples of what they are. A lot of this is public information anyway. If you go to like a guide star or something like that, I just want to kind of go to the last one for people to be able to see. And sorry that I'm strolling quickly. Let me see if I can go faster to this way. Those are examples through the American Humane Society. And so there are very large, depending on the organization, but that is the toolkit. So a couple things I want to kind of emphasize, and then I'm going to turn it over to Pam. Understand the size of your organization. Look at what that budget is for your project versus the budget for the organization that's sponsoring you or the nonprofit that you are a part of. Spell check, word check, be comfortable, right, when you're doing this. If you need to take a break, do it, but inhale, exhale, ask questions, come to the sessions. We want your bright idea to be put in a proposal that can be considered. And look at the values of the organization of BCYF and its commitment to help and heal, not harm, to enhance when we talk about racial justice, to make the life better for youth in Baltimore City, and the commitment that they're already showing that they also want to invest in ideas from you. They want to socially invest in making our life better in Baltimore City for a generation that clearly needs it. So I'm going to pause right there and see if there are any questions, and then I'm going to turn it over to Pam.
And for questions, if you want to either type in the chat or feel free to unmute and ask the questions. The floor is open.
Hi, yes.
I see a question. I see a couple questions.
Are you about to read from the chat?
From the chat, or if you want to do it verbally, that's fine.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to ask, do you guys, along with the application, accept like letters of support?
The only kind of letter that you would need is, for example, if you are a nonprofit you have a nonprofit sponsoring you, we want something in writing, like an agreement letter or memorandum of understanding, talking about that relationship, who's going to be that nonprofit is the fiduciary officer, and making sure that it's really spelled out what are the expectations, the time, what will be done, all of those things. So that's the written letter from that. But in reference to, it was a great question, because a lot of funders will ask for support letters, because a lot of people claim to be community-based, youth-based, and they're not. They just are savvy with words, get grants, and leave the community behind. But this one is really looking at the organization and looking at your worthiness for investment and the probability of investing in something that's going to be impactful. But that was a great question. Also saw, Angelo, you also had your hand up as well.
Yes, thank you for the information. I do have a question in reference to the unrestricted funding, and money can only be used for programming. And why do I ask that is because to put together the program, it costs money. Somebody has to do the work. So how do you separate that? Because if it's just for programming, how does the person who do the work gets paid?
Well, that's a great question, but that's the uniqueness of dealing with 501c3s, is that the reality is they're volunteer based. And so you have restricted funds that cannot be used for other certain aspects. And there's a list in the toolkit that's we didn't go over in reference to this particular part, but it tells you about the ones that can be used and what can't. You may need to have supplemental income to be able to do that, and other funder that would oversee that, volunteers that would oversee that. For example, even if you were to hire a consultant to help your organization with this process, or evaluator, they would have to have a 1099, because we want to make sure that the funds are used based on what it's intended for. If it's unrestricted, it may be because you received that in fundraising, or you were able to get some in-kind donation from someone. Regina, you had your hand up as well?
Yeah, I do want to just kind of clarify that it's program related expenses, Angelo, so staffing can actually be included. Take a look at the application toolkit and you'll be able to see all of the allowable and unallowable expenses, because nonprofits do operate differently. Some organizations are able to, you know, have staff on payroll, have W-2 employees. There are other volunteer models that were mentioned by Dr. Sharon. So it's program related expenses, meaning there's specificity around how the funds can be used. It's not completely unrestricted where you can use it on anything in the whole wide world. And so take a look at the allowable expense guide that's included in the toolkit to determine if it makes sense. And also I would say the other piece of that is also to think about how, and I see a question, so this ties into Bruce's question in the chat box, which is what is the grant award range for the 2023 Grassroots Fund? So it is $150,000 over 3 years. So essentially $50,000 a year. So think about what those expenses could look like. Understand that we are working with public funding, and so there is a different degree of accountability that's required for those funds that are expended. And so we encourage folks to think about, we encourage folks to do this. And it's not always the case, and it doesn't have to be. Think about what are those large expenses, you know, that might very well be a salary, right? That may very well be some equipment that is needed. So that you know, because for every expense, it will need to be itemized during reporting. And so hopefully that gives some level of explanation. Hannah, did you want to add anything else? Or Benice,
No, I just,
Vice President of Finance and Administration, is also on the line.
I do also want to just introduce, so Regina is the VP of grant making. So I just wanted to formally introduce you. Thank you for chiming in there. And yes, so just to summarize, the funds are restricted in that they need to specifically relate to the program that is youth serving, Baltimore City-based, you know, meets those requirements. But within that, you know, you can use those funds to, again, as Regina referenced, the allowable cost guide. So that could be to cover utilities, for the building and space that is for your program. So not for your home,
Yep.
right? You can use that for salaries, but for staff members who are directly working within your program, supporting that program in some way. So that's what is meant by the restricted piece.
Benice, anything else you would add? And I'd also like to introduce our Vice President of Finance and Administration. Anything else, Benice, we missed?
Hi, everyone. No, absolutely. This is a restricted grant. And so we just encourage everyone to just pay attention to those guidelines that are outlined. They're pretty detailed. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to reach out to us. We'll be happy to provide any insight or extra information you may have in reference to them.
And I
Are there
see,
any other questions? Oh, go ahead, Regina.
sorry, I just saw another question in the chat.
That's what I was going to ask you. Okay.
I saw that it went away. I think I saw it that asked about the types of funding. Did I see it? Something that someone asked, was the funding public?
Someone asked in the
Yeah,
Q&A.
I
made a typo. I'm
Oh,
Bruce Lyons from UMBC,
Hi,
and
Bruce.
it makes it where if we apply for state, federal, or city funding, it has to go through one channel. If it's private money, we have to go through our foundation. So where does your money, is your money from the public or is it private?
Public dollars. These are
So it's
public dollars that come from the city. BCYF is the fiscal agent
Gotcha.
that disseminates these public dollars. BCYF is not a public agency. We are quasi-government, but the
Right.
funding, these are public dollars.
Okay, that's what I thought. That's great. Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yes,
Angela, okay.
how is the funding provided? Let's say that an organization gets $50,000. Is it twice a year, once a year, every 6 months? You get a check every month? How does it work?
So the payment schedule is also outlined in this application toolkit. The way that it works, there are within the first year, there are 3 payments that will be made. The first will be made upon signing your grant agreement, as well as providing some additional documentation to us, such as your ACH, a W-9, and some other forms. You'll get 25% of that 50,000, so 12,500. Then you'll get another 25% of that 50,000, so another 12,500. We shoot for around 3 months after that first one. It's after you've met some other requirements from BCYF. So there are some background check requirements, insurance requirements, which we highly recommend you take a look at, because it does take a little bit of time to get those requirements in place. And again, the insurance requirements are outlined in this document. And so with those requirements, there's also a meeting with our financial team to review your budget and other things. Then you'll get that next 25%. And then at around the 6-month mark from when your grant cycle started, you'll get your third disbursement for that first year. After the first year, you'll get 50% at the start of that year and 50% at the 6-month mark. And that will be the same for year 3 as well.
Any other questions? All right, so you may have some other questions. I'm just going to share a few things and then continue to put your questions in the chat box. And so wanted to mention a couple things, that there is a sample application. So it's completed. We'll share that so you can take a look at that. And let me just put that up on the screen very quickly. So this is available to you. So if you want to take a look at some of the information that's filled in, one of the things I've been in grants and I've worked in grants and contracts, and I've reviewed applications before. And one of the things that we find is that people sometimes don't complete the answers in its entire, or the question in its entirety. And so you want to make sure that you go through everything. But before I proceed, type in the chat box, what have been some of your challenges in applying for grants? What have been some of the areas in terms of the application process where it may not have gone so well, if at all? Type in the chat box for me, and that'll help us. What are some of the areas? What have been some of the barriers that have resulted in you maybe not getting the funding? Because many of you said you have received grants in the past. So just wanted to check in. And I'm going to stop sharing the screen so that I can see. Anyone? Any challenges?
Good evening.
It's easy
May I
for you.
say something out loud? I'm driving. Can I
Yes,
ask you a question
Renee?
out loud? Yes, Renee.
Yes, sure.
How are you today? I don't know what are some of the challenges. I know, like, there's grants that, well, I am a BCYF grantee. We got the first round of grants 2018 and then the second round. So that has been amazing for our organization. But
Congratulations.
we have applied for some other things, but there has not, we didn't get like a response back saying, well, you didn't get it because of this. But I do think one of the things that might not have been very clear on our part was like how we were going to, because we don't have a location right now. So I guess the plan of how were you going to implement the project and, who will you collaborate with, that kind of stuff we didn't really have in place. So, so that's one of the things I think kind of might have contributed us not getting some other grants.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, because you're right. You're not always going to get a response back saying specifically you didn't do A, B, or C. But sometimes on the organization's end, you'll say, I've seen it where someone left off a part. They didn't submit something and they said, oh man, we forgot to do that. So I was just curious to see. Angelo, you had your hand up. Were you going to share something?
Yes, sometimes align the mission of the organization with the mission of the funders. And sometimes they don't align, even though sometimes culturally don't align, sometimes socially don't align. You're doing the work, but you have to really change your mission to really be able to get the funding, because the funders, sometimes they're only looking for certain things.
Okay. It is very important that you're aligned. And I don't know that you want to change your mission, but you want to look at how your mission and the work that you're doing does align with the funder. Absolutely. And maybe it's the specific program, because I don't know that you want to change your organization's mission, but when you think about the specific program that you're looking at, see how it aligns with the work of the funder. Yeah, so that's also a good one. Anyone else? Okay, so in addition, again, keep putting your questions in the chat box and we'll take a look at those. In addition to the sample application, we have prepared some questions for you to consider. Again, just something for you to take a look at, and Hannah is going to share the JOT form in a few minutes. So you will see the actual document that you're going to have to type the information in. It's our understanding that the process or the application has been streamlined and they're using the JOT form this time. So I'm going to share with you document, excuse me, that it's a Word document. Here we go. And this will be available to you also. So can everyone see this? Just give me a thumbs up if you can see this document on the screen. Anyone? Yes? No?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So one of the things, just go through this before you submit the application. We would highly recommend that you type your answers into a Word document or something else. For those of you who are using Mac, some of you use Pages. So type your responses in another document first, just so that you can go back. The one thing about JOT form is when you're completing it, you have to fill in the answers before you can go to the next page. So remember, just like with you using when you're looking at the sample application, you can walk through and scroll all the way down and look at what's coming next, You won't be able to see that with the JOT form. So typing your answers in another document can be very helpful. So ask yourself if you've reviewed all the questions listed under eligibility. So do you meet the eligibility criteria, right? Did you review all of those questions? Did you make sure you didn't exceed the word limit? Again, that's something that we can go through in the technical sessions. For those of you who are not clear, some of you may have experience and know exactly what to do to make sure you know you're looking at your word count, but you do not want to, as Dr. Sharon said, exceed that word count. So here you see, put it in a Word, and I said Word document, but again, that may be Pages, it may be something else that you use depending on the computer system or the operating system that you're using. And then if you are partnering or collaborating with another organization, make sure that you have the written documentation, whether it's the fiscal agreement, letter of support, letter of agreement, MOU from the organization, and make sure that you give yourself enough time and the organization, right? So you know when the application deadline is, so make sure that you're giving them enough time. As many of you are probably busy, like most people, and the same way when you have a partnering organization, if you give them just a few days, they may not be able to get that to you in time. And so you want to make sure that you plan this out. Plan in terms of when you're going to request the partnership or letter of agreement, get the documents that you need so that you can make sure that you meet the deadline. And so do your responses fully answer each question? It's always helpful to go back and reread the question and say, did I answer all parts of the question? Because sometimes there'll be multiple pieces that's included in there. So make sure that you have fully answered each question. We already talked about proofreading. We'll go through that in some of the technical support sessions to make sure that spelling and grammar, it makes a difference. All attachments, did you include all the attachments? Very important, because you do not want to, and if you look at this last item on this list, we talk about an incomplete application. You do not want to submit your application in parts. Everything needs to be submitted at once. Another reason why we say, put it in a Word document, because then you can just copy and paste your answers into that JOT form. When you do that, it's already been spell checked, all of that. So these are just some questions for your consideration before you submit your application. These are just some things that can be very important and make a difference. Of course, the content of your application, the responses are going to make a significant difference, but you want to make sure that you have a completed application when you submit something. So if you haven't gotten a letter of support and you have everything else, You don't want to submit your application until you have everything that you need. Okay? Are there any questions about anything that I've just shared? Any questions? Any questions about the application in general? And then Hannah's going to share the job form, but are there any questions?
Hi, yes. Well, I had put in the chat from just the previous question when you asked about the challenges some people may face. And my response was, it wasn't really a question. I just kind of made a response saying, just being a new organization, what recommendations would you have to kind of encourage a new organization? Like, I am a fiscally sponsored organization, but my program has been around a little under a year. What would you recommend to kind of strengthen, my hopes, my chances of getting funded?
Great question. One of the things that I would encourage, and I would encourage, Dr. Sharon or Regina or Hannah or anyone else to respond as well. But one thing, question for you, are you doing great work?
Yes, I am, of course.
So one is, you said of course, that's right. Part of it is believing in your program. And
Okay.
then, if you're already doing the great work, but also accept the support that is available through the technical assistance sessions that are going to be held to
Okay.
help you to flesh
yeah.
out your ideas and things like that. That's going to
Okay.
be very, very useful for you, because that's where you're going to get the support so that you can ask any question as you're writing out your responses, things like that. If it's to see
Okay.
whether it's clear, that can be very beneficial. We have a session tomorrow on partnering and collaborations. So we can
Yeah, I
provide some
signed up for
information
that
about
one.
that.
Yep, I did
Okay,
sign up for that one. And I also have on my calendar for the one at the Pratt Library on the 15th. So I do
okay,
plan to attend. I have partnered with a few other community organizations. I know the other lady mentioned not having her own physical location. I don't have my physical location, but I do have locations that have agreed to allow me to offer my services at the different recreation centers and community centers where I can like host my workshops and do things like that. So, but it's
okay.
just just being new, you're just always just that fear of like not having as much background to show.
But you mentioned a lot of
Yeah,
really good positive things like your relationship and your credibility and within
Mhm.
the community and partnering. This is
Yeah.
very powerful. And then also I want you to kind of reframe, even though I know you're kind of a neophyte in the experience, but your
Mhm.
commitment is real and
Yes.
to helping the youth, particularly
Yeah.
in Baltimore City. And you may know what's unique about your program that may be much more beneficial or having much more greater impact. Just because we have things that are quote unquote best practices, yours may
Mhm.
be a new promising perspective.
Okay.
You may give a unique twist. You may see based on your program design where there has been some issues or factors that aren't being addressed. And as a result, it prevents progress, right? As
Okay.
fluently as you would want. So rethink of the uniqueness. You don't want to be a copycat. There's always other new things, and you're willing to say, I'm investment worthy. So I
Okay.
would encourage you to also take advantage of one-on-ones with us. We have a
Yeah.
whole team, the
so
group, we
yeah,
can work on specific areas that are
yeah,
unique to you. You know what I mean? That'll be in private and confidential. So we can
Okay.
give you the best options, but one of them won't be fear, but it will be you taking that energy and just reframing this idea that's looking at the motivation and the motives. And as long as
Yeah.
they're
yeah.
good, why not try? Why not put forth this? Learn from
Mhm.
the experience and evolve. Let's kind of take this. Yeah.
Yeah, I
So
appreciate this
Sharon, so
session.
when I have,
It's helpful. It's very helpful.
then that's good. So one question for you, because you said, how long has your program been in existence?
About 7 months, 6 or 7 months now, a little shy of a year.
Okay. And so because applying organizations must have been in existence for at least 1 year,
Mhm.
as well as at least 1 year of experience running youth programs.
Okay, so I do have the experience of running one, and I'm I'm a fiscally sponsored by Fusion Partners, so they're,
Okay.
so that's another question though. So does that, my actual nonprofit, the organization itself, not running consecutive for a year, but running in another program that I was a part of before starting my own, does that count for time?
So Regina, I would ask Regina to respond to that, please.
Yeah,
Yes.
so your program, or in your case, because it's an organization, but you're considering applying as a fiscally sponsored organization?
Exactly, yes.
Okay, so that would be, in that case, it would be, does your organization have at least 1 year of programming experience running youth programming? And so there is a question that talks about the year that your programming began, as well as sort of the program's history. So I think that would be sort of reviewed in that due diligence process. And I would encourage you to have Fusion to speak to that in that letter from your fiscal sponsor. The other thing I just want to talk about, since you asked a question about, oh, here it is. I knew I wrote down some notes somewhere. Advice for a newer program or organization. One is just ensuring that you have a fleshed out mission and vision and value statements. Like you've taken the time to really say, this is what we do, this is how we do it, this is why we do it, and this is what we're looking or aiming to accomplish. And then with that, also a well thought out program design. So that's one of the reasons why it says programs and organizations have to be in existence for at least 1 year, just so you've had some proof of concept, something to say, all right, this is what we were thinking. We tried it out. Here's what we learned. We found maybe we need to make some tweaks. Maybe we don't, right? But we've done it. We've actually done it. It's not just a concept in here. Third thing is, I would say draw on your assets. So, I can't remember if it was Dr. Pam or Dr. Sharon that talked about, okay, we've been in existence for 1 year. However, here's what we do have. We have established partnerships, or we have a, reputation in the community. We have a strong youth following, or whatever those assets are. Make sure that you talk about those in one of your responses, and talk about the need. So even though it's in existence for 1 year, I would hope that it was founded or implemented because there was a need, there was a gap that existed that you felt like your program could actually address. So talk about that need, right? And how this organization might be able to fill that need. I think the other piece is, so talk about your identified partners, your program models. And the last piece is ask for feedback. Since you're fairly new, there could be some no's that come from funders. Ask for feedback. And get it on the front end, both the front end and the back end. So take advantage of the free technical assistance that BCYF is offering. Understand also that this is a community review process. So community members will review these grant proposals using a rubric, and they'll score and make recommendations for funding. BCYF employees or staff don't do that. So it may or may not be considered for funding, right? If it's not, don't get this. If it is, great. I hope it is, right? But if it's not, don't get discouraged. Ask for feedback. That will only help you to strengthen your program model and strengthen your applications moving forward.
Okay, thank you.
There is one more question in the chat, and then I do want to wrap up. And there's a couple of pieces of information I wanted to share with everyone. So the last question in the chat is from Liddell. She asked, the budget maximum is $350,000. Does this include the operating and program budget combined? Regina is nodding her head.
Total organizational budget. So your organizational budget consists of both. So, yep.
Thank you, Regina. And so now,
I had one question that was based on what we were talking about before. What if our program was run under another pre-existing nonprofit so it's been going on for more than a year, but my organization has been around for less than a year? That makes sense. Would you consider supporting it?
Would you be applying as a 501c3 or as a fiscally sponsored program or project?
I mean, either one, but probably as a 501c3, I would say.
So your IRS letter of determination would indicate, you know, how long the organization has sort of been in existence. That's a unique one. So maybe we could talk about that one offline, because I want to make sure I understand and I don't want to just respond
Okay.
in this moment. And I know we have limited time. Sorry, Hannah.
Yep.
So if you just, I'll send you a message.
Okay, no problem.
Okay.
Thanks, Regina. So I did just quickly want to share what the online application will look like, because what we went through today is the application toolkit. It was provided as a resource so you can have access to a lot of information about the application process, as well as what the grant actually looks like. And then it also does have the application and rubric in there, so you can get all of the pieces of the application together. But the actual application, when you are submitting, must be submitted via this JOT form. And I will share the link in the chat so that everybody has that. It is now open, it's live. It does save as you go, but this is what it looks like. And I'll just go through the first page because this is the eligibility page. So if you say no to any of these, you will not move on to the next page. But if you are eligible, meet all of these requirements and go to the next page, then you are in the application. They must be submitted, complete applications must be submitted by 5 p.m. on April 7th. And this just goes through all of the information we've discussed today, what's needed for your application. And then, as Dr. Sharon had referenced, on each page, there are videos going through, again, kind of talking you through that specific page of the application. And then I'm not going to go through every page since it requires me to enter information to continue, but this is what the application will look like once you start actually filling it out. So I did just want to share that with you so everyone understands and knows that it looks a little bit different from the application toolkit that we have provided for you. Does anyone have any questions about the actual application form? And I see Regina did share the email to send any specific questions for grants. It's grantmaking@bcyfund.org. And just another piece to note there, we are asking any questions regarding the application, anything around this process. We're asking that questions be sent by 5 p.m. on April 5th, just so we have time to properly address them. If you send emails to us on April 7th at 4:55 and the application closes at 5 o'clock, we can't guarantee that we're going to be able to get you a response. So just to keep that in mind. And then finally, I did just want to share a couple of QR codes for your reference. I know Ebony, you referenced that you are attending the computer lab session on March 15th. We're so excited to see you. These are 2 in-person events that are occurring next week. The first is on March 15th from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Enoch Pratt Central Library. And the second is on March 18th from 9:30 to 1 p.m. at the Center for Urban Families. We're providing snacks and refreshments at both. But more importantly, these are great in-person opportunities to be able to get some real-time application support, and not only application support, but access to a computer and internet and other materials that you may need in order to support your application development. So we would love to see you there. In addition, we are also offering one-on-one and also small group application support that's been referenced a few times. So this is the link to register for those sessions. In addition to the computer lab session, we're also offering some slots of application support during the computer lab session on March 18th. So you can find the option to register for those sessions here. It's a great resource. Again, all of these resources are free, and we highly recommend and encourage you to engage in these resources, take advantage of these resources. Our consultants, the Expand Now team, are amazing and full of knowledge, and please utilize that. So this is the QR code there. And then finally, in our last little bit of time, this is just a QR code for a session evaluation form. If you are able to complete it, we would greatly appreciate it. All of your feedback is really taken and appreciated as we work to develop future technical assistance sessions and programs. So that is all I have to wrap up. As mentioned at the beginning, this recording, as well as any materials from today, will be posted online, as well as past materials from past sessions and the materials that will come up in future sessions. And I do see, Renee, you have your hand raised.
I am technically challenged. I do not know how to scan the QR code being on your phone. And my second question is, in that massive email y'all sent, which I appreciate, there was a session about a round table for past BCYF grantees, I think. Did I see that correctly?
A panel, yep, for previous grantees.
Yes.
Yes, I was wondering how could, if there's openings on that panel, and I didn't know if I could just email y'all back with that email, or do I, how would I find out about that?
So the panel has been kind of organized and planned in terms of the panelists for that session. But we, welcome you to come and engage and participate as an attendee for that session. It is on March, and for anyone who is listening, that session is on March 23rd, and it will be a great session.
Okay.
And Hannah, if I could just answer the first question that she had in terms of about the technical piece, the QR code. Looks like you're driving, Renee. Are you driving right now? Or are you passenger?
I am.
Okay.
I'm driving.
Okay. I don't want you to do this. Don't try this while you're driving. But the idea is, all you would do is, if you were to take a picture, like you were taking use your camera, take a picture and hover it over the QR code, and you're going to see something pop up on there. Just tap on there and it's going to take you right to that link. So all you have to do is act like you're getting ready to take a picture of that using your phone, and you'll see that something's going to tap up. But please don't do that now.
Reference, not this evening. Not on.
And I would like to.
That's right. Yes, please don't do
But
that.
no,
Okay,
Renee,
also,
a follow-up email is
Yeah.
going to come out with that session evaluation form, and you can always go to the BCYF's website to register for the other ones. Hannah, I'm sorry.
That's what I need. Thank you, Bo. That's what I need. Thank you.
And Lillian has also so kindly dropped the links into the chat. So they're not just the QR code right now, they're in the chat as well.
Awesome.
All right, thank you so much, everyone. Are there any other questions before we sign off? All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining this evening. I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Have a good evening, everyone. Take care.